Yeah, thanks so much, Garrett, for really going into such detail with this. I think that's really tremendously helpful for the students. I do have a couple questions that I kind of
Mhm.
wrote down as we're going
Awesome.
we're going through this. So I guess the first thing is that students are of course being given this case memo, and they're being told that this is the only thing that you should be using in terms of research, and this
Mhm.
is kind of the all-encompassing package there. And they
Mhm.
see these comparable players and everything. So, like, what do you think are like what do you think teams should do? I suppose in just starting off, so they get the case memo. Like, what do you find is the best practice for just getting kind of your toe in the water there and starting off?
Yeah, I would definitely start by looking at the list of comparable players because that is something that's extremely helpful to have, and a lot of time is usually spent on finding that kind of appropriate marketplace. So look at the comparable players that's given to you. Look at the salaries of their contracts because at the end of the day, that's what you're arguing, right? It doesn't matter the comparison between Connor Brown and Kevin LeBanc if you know you know, all the other players other than Kevin LeBanc, like I mentioned, Burakovsky, Nichushkin, if they're all at say like $4 million, and Kevin LeBanc for some very very strange reason is at $10 million, um, you might have a hard time arguing that. So look at those contracts and then kind of start developing an idea for at least a range of where that player could be, and then really look at those statistics. Find the players kind of the profiles using those statistics given to you for the comparable players to find similarities, whether that's points, whether that's ice time, whatever it is. Start to highlight a few players that look like they could be comparable players, and then look more closely at those salaries because whether you want to average out those salaries or whether or not you want to find a way to distinguish or make similar the assigned player Adam Pellick's salary to some of those comparable players, that is going to be your best start, and then you can start fleshing out the arguments using those statistics.
Right. So to provide an analogy, it almost sounds like if we put this in almost mock trial terms, it's that you're looking at the evidence and you're coming up with your theory of the case, in a sense, or
Exactly.
coming up with your theory for what Adam Pellick should be making. And of course, we know I think that theory is going to change depending on which role you are, deciding to prepare for first,
Mhm.
whether you're preparing for the Islanders role or if you're preparing for Adam Pellick's role there. So that makes a lot of sense in terms of really students diving into the comparable players and the
Mhm.
evidence in a sense, and then
Perfect.
figuring out what the story they're trying to tell about Adam Pellick is. So
Yep.
that's a great answer, and I think that's really helpful. Just to follow up on that, what would you say should be the approach to students once they have done their sort of they're done their due diligence and figuring
Mhm.
out what they feel about the comparable players, what kind of their theory of the case is? What would you say the approach would be to sort of preparing oral arguments? Because we know some
Mhm.
students are doing this for the first time, and it's one thing to kind of come up with the theory, but it's another
Mhm.
thing to translate that into arguments. So what do you find are the best practices for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the competition kind of sets up the preparation beautifully. And we've thought about this with the format because you're competing in teams of two, which means one person can take each side and try to debate against each other. Because and that is an excellent way to kind of figure out your arguments and the weaknesses and then address those, and ultimately, your work won't go to waste because in the two preliminary rounds, you'll have to represent the player and the team. So you will really be working on both cases at once. And I think that once you develop the theory of the case using the evidence and obviously fleshing out the arguments in more eloquent or you know oral advocacy terms, once you start having those arguments, it really does come down to whether or not those arguments are strong enough, and that could come down to whether or not you're considering all the evidence, whether or not the evidence you chosen not to include is detrimental to your case, or whether or not you're just presenting or conveying your message clearly enough in your submissions. And the best way to know that is to practice against someone else whose main goal at that point, your partner, is to poke as many holes as they can in your case and see if you can patch them all up.
Yeah, no, excellent point in terms of, sort of using that preparation time to try and already anticipate what the other side may
Mhm.
poke holes in your argument. And of course, the nice thing is that although, you know, you could assign it that way, still each person is going to have a chance, given that each competitor is going to have those 7 minutes each
Mhm.
through their submissions to present their argument on
Exactly.
one side or the other there. Like, what do you think is typically an effective way to split up between two people? As if they're
Mhm.
making one set of submissions, they have the 14 minutes, and let's say they're arguing for Adam Pellick's side. Like, what do you find is the best way to split up?
Yeah, so I would say in oral submissions in hockey arbitration, there are two main components, but don't split those two components in half, as in one take one component and the other takes the other. But the two components, one is kind of the NHL years, the career of the player, and then the second one is the player comparables. And I kind of went through that with Connor Brown. Spend the bulk of your time on the player comparables, because even though a player's statistics are important, at the end of the day, it means nothing when you can't compare it and describe the marketplace that the player should fit into. So the way I would split it up is I would say, one person do one well do the NHL years, the first component, and then take one of the comparable players. And this is assuming that a team perhaps chooses three, because the magic number is always three, is the Goldilocks number. So assuming that a team chooses three comparables, one can do the NHL years plus one comparable, and then the other person could do two comparable. But don't let that sway you. Don't let the number three sway you, because sometimes it's better to have two. Sometimes it's better to have four. So depending on what you find fits your case, choose that number of comparables. But I would say make sure that between the two of you, that you each get to do at least one comparable, because that's where the case comes down to. And it's a lot of work for someone to just take all the comparables, because that is the meat of it. So make sure you're sharing that.
Right. Awesome. That's really helpful for students to understand as they're kind of preparing their arguments. So,
Mhm.
that's great to show how we start from kind of the beginning of dissecting the case a little bit, turning into the preparation process of developing those oral arguments, and then going into the actually splitting up of the speaking roles.
Mhm.
So I think that's all for my questions. I would like to give the audience a
Yeah.
chance to get in if any of you have any questions. If not, no worries,
Mhm.
and you can certainly feel free to email us here. You can leave a comment on the website, or you can email me at wilksm@hdsb.ca. Happy to get into contact with any teachers or students who are watching this and have any questions. So I turn it over to see if anyone has any questions.
No, looks like I did a pretty good job, eh?
Yeah. No, like, thanks so much for your time and everything. So
No
again,
worries.
if you're watching this, feel free to reach out. Happy to help. And we're really looking forward to a great competition. We've had, a really wonderful outpouring of students who are very interested in this. So we are very delighted to be offering this, and we're really looking forward to it. And I know that, the law students and lawyers who are committed to judging this competition are very excited, and they love the idea. So we're very much looking forward to this. So thanks everyone for coming out today. Thank you so much, Garrett, for taking the time to explain, some of these tips and tricks to us. And we look forward to seeing everybody at the competition.
Perfect.
All
Thanks,
right,
everyone.
take care.